With Destiny 2's build crafting evolving more and more as time goes on, it can be hard to pick the right Titan build for your preferred subclass, but today I hope to put an end to that problem. Today I will be highlighting the best builds to use for each subclass on your Titan. If you want to skip to a certain subclass, check the timestamps in the description below. Otherwise, be sure to check out the Hunter episode that I uploaded as I covered the best Hunter builds for each subclass. That said, I'm SniperKH, and let's get into the video. To start us off, we have Solar Titans. Throughout the years of Destiny 2, we've seen various builds pop up for this subclass, but there's one build that has stayed at the top for all of Destiny's history, with that being the Bonk Hammer build. This build has stayed at the top due to its incredible survivability and respectable damage. For the subclass layout, you'll want to copy the one you see on screen now. The important parts for this subclass will be our melee and our aspects. Our melee is the throwing hammer, which we can continuously refresh by picking our hammer back up, allowing us to easily refresh one of our aspects. Speaking of aspects, we'll be using Roaring Flames and Soul Invictus. Roaring Flames will boost the damage of our solar abilities by getting kills with solar abilities, while Soul Invictus will spawn sunspots on solar ability kills, which we can use for health regeneration. For fragments, I've selected Ember of Mercy, Ember of Singeing, Ember of Empyrean, and Ember of Searing. Embers of Mercy and Searing will work well together, granting us an easy way of getting restoration, while Ember of Empyrean will grant us an easy way of getting our solar abilities to be extended. Finally, Ember of Singeing will help generate our class ability, which is always nice to have. For our exotics, there's one required exotic and one highly recommended exotic to use. For the armor, you'll need to run Syntheseps to get every benefit of our melees, as being surrounded by enemies will massively buff our melee and super damage. For the other exotic, I'd highly recommend Tractor Cannon to apply easy debuffs to targets for even more damage. For stats to focus, the only one you need to worry about is melee. Having a high melee stat will allow us to generate our melee back fast and do bonus melee damage, which is great for a melee centric build. For armor mods, you'll want to use armor mods that grant benefits for using our melee ability, so because of that you'll want to use hands-on, heavy-handed, melee font, and time dilation to extend melee font's duration. For other mods to use, I'd recommend Harmonic Siphon and Solar Weapon Surge to grant more benefits for using solar weapons. This build has stood the test of time within Destiny, and while there are some other appealing Solar Titan builds, none stand a chance to this monster of a build. Next up, we have the Void subclass, and I'm going to be entirely honest with you, this subclass sucks. There's not many builds to use for this subclass, and the best build for this subclass is kind of situational. That said, I'll still show you how to set it up. The subclass layout can be found on screen now. The important pieces for this build are our melee and aspects yet again. For our melee, we'll be using Shield Bash, as it'll be the best option for one of our aspects and our chosen exotic armor piece. For the aspects, you'll want to use Offensive Bulwark and Bastion. Offensive Bulwark will make our melee deal more damage when we have an overshield active, which will be nice since Bastion grants us an overshield when using our barricade. For fragments, I'd recommend Echo of Starvation, Echo of Undermining, Echo of Provision, and Echo of Leeching. Echo of Undermining and Echo of Provision will synergize well with one another, as Echo of Undermining will allow our grenades to apply weaken to enemies, and Echo of Provision will grant us melee energy when getting grenade kills. For Echo of Starvation and Echo of Leeching, these will boost our survivability, with Starvation granting us Devour from Orbs of Power or Void Breaches, and Leeching will start our health regeneration when we get a melee kill. For our exotics, there's one required exotic and one recommended exotic. For the required exotic, you'll need Peregrine Greaves. Peregrine Greaves will boost our shield bash damage when we activate it in the air. Additionally, we'll get our melee charge refunded if we defeat mini-bosses or champions using our shield bash. For the recommended exotic, I'd suggest using Tractor Cannon, as this will grant us a larger damage bonus for our shield bash. For the armor stats, you'll really only need to focus melee since that stat will boost our melee regeneration and damage. That said, class would also be a great stat to invest points into since we can generate our class ability back faster. For the armor mods to use, I used a healthy amount of melee mods while also having some mods to boost class ability regeneration. Armor mods like Hands-On, Heavy-Handed, Melee Font, and Time Dilation were obvious picks, but I also chose to use 2 Insulations and 1 Invigoration to get my class ability back faster. While Void Titan is definitely the worst subclass of the 3 to use, this build will at least grant you a solid build to take into most content. Now on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have Arc Titans who have potentially the best build in the game, and that of Bull Charge Simulator. Despite the nerfs that this build got heading into the Edge of Fate, this build is still phenomenal for all forms of content in Destiny 2. The build layout can be found on screen now, but the importance of this build lies in two options, being our class ability and one of our aspects. For our class ability, I've opted for Rally Barricade, as it synergizes very well with one of our aspects. Of course, that aspect is Storm's Keep, which will grant us the ability to generate Bull Charge when standing behind a Rally Barricade. This aspect has proven to be one of the strongest aspects in the game for endgame team play, hence why this build is so popular. For the other aspect, I've gone with Knockout to grant bonus melee damage and a way to restore health if need be. That said, if you find yourself struggling with class ability regeneration, then use Touch of Thunder with Pulse Grenades, as this will help with that massively. For our fragments, I've opted to use Spark of Magnitude, Spark of Discharge, Spark of Beacons, and Spark of Resistance. Spark of Discharge and Spark of Beacons will buff our arc weapons by allowing them to generate ionic traces and having the ability to blind. For Spark of Discharge, this will allow for our grenades to last longer, increasing their DPS slightly. For Spark of Resistance, this will boost our survivability by granting us damage resistance when we are surrounded. For our gear, the only exotic I'd suggest you use is Crest of Alpha Lupi, as this will allow you to heal you and your teammates while doing damage behind your barricade. Other than that, I'd suggest using arc weapons with this build. For armor stats, I'd suggest focusing on class and weapons, as class will allow you to generate your class ability back faster, while weapons will boost how much damage our weapons do against targets. For mods, it's pretty easy to use. I've opted to use Dynamo for super energy when using my class ability near targets, Heavy-handed for Orbs of Power when defeating targets with melee, Arc Weapon Surge to boost arc weapon damage, and Time Dilation to let our buffs last longer. With this setup, it's unsurprising to see why this build has been so dominant, and I expect we'll see this build dominate for more time to come. Transitioning into the Darkness subclasses, we have the Stasis subclass. The Stasis subclass has been rough for a pretty long time now for Titans, but after a recent patch, this subclass has become one of the best in the game. For the subclass layout, you'll want to copy the one you see on screen now. The importance of this subclass comes from the aspects that the build revolves around. For starters, we have Howl of the Storm, which will spawn Stasis Crystals when using your melee ability after sliding, which will act as a consecration-like attack. For the other aspect, we'll be using Tectonic Harvest, which will spawn Stasis Crystals when we destroy Stasis Crystals or defeating frozen enemies, which we will then use for melee energy or frost armor. For the fragments, we'll be using them to boost the damage of the Stasis Crystals while boosting ability regeneration. Because of that, the fragments we'll be using will be Whisper of Fissures, Whisper of Hunger, Whisper of Rhyme, and Whisper of Bonds. For the exotics, there's only one that is required to use with this build, and that is Syntheseps. Syntheseps will boost the damage that this build does further, which is incredibly helpful. For the weapons, I'd recommend using Tractor Cannon to boost your damage further. For the stats to focus, you'll want to focus on melee and super, as these two stats will boost ability regeneration and damage. For the armor mods, I'd recommend using mods that synergize with melee abilities like Hands-On, Heavy-handed, Melee Fawn, and Time Dilation. Overall, this build is a pretty easy build to set up and use, and is definitely one you will want to give a try. Moving on to Strand, we have a very unique build that has definitely never been covered before. Okay, enough of the sarcasm. The best Strand Titan build is still Banner of War. This build has been covered several times at this point, but here's a quick explanation on how to set it up. The subclass layout is on screen now. The important parts of this build are the grenade and the aspects. The grenade is the grapple grenade, which we'll be using to boost this build's damage massively. For the aspects, you'll want to use Banner of War into the fray. Banner of War will massively increase the damage your melee does while periodically granting you healing, while Into the Fray will grant you Woven Mail when destroying a Tangle. For the fragments, we'll be boosting our ability regeneration and survivability, so because of that, use Thread of Fury, Thread of Warding, Thread of Ascent, and Thread of Generation. For the exotics to use, you have two armor choices, being Syntheseps or Worm God's Caress. Both of these exotics grant melee damage, but under different requirements, with Syntheseps requiring that you be surrounded, while Worm God grants it after getting melee kills, so pick whichever one you prefer. For the weapon, I'd highly recommend using the Navigator with its Catalyst and a 1-2 punch shotgun to further your damage massively. For armor stats, you only need to focus the grenade stat, as our grapple melee is affected by the grenade stat, so you should only focus that solely. For armor mods, I'd highly recommend using grenade focused mods like Ashes to Assets, Firepower, Grenade Fawn, and Time Dilation. Overall, this build has continued to be a top meta pick for Titans, and it's very understandable as to how. For the final subclass to cover in this video, we have Prismatic. Prismatic has been one of the most powerful Titan subclasses in the game, and today's build proves why. For starters, copy the subclass layout you see on screen now. Our abilities are more important for this build, so for a quick explanation, Thruster helps us with ability regeneration, Frenzy Blade grants us more melee charges to pair with Consecration, and Glacier Grenade will slightly increase this build's ad clear and damage capabilities. For our aspects, we're using Consecration and Knockout. Consecration grants us a great ad clear and DPS tool, especially when paired with Frenzy Blade, while Knockout will further boost the damage of this build while also granting us a way to heal ourselves. For the fragments, we're using them to grant easy access to Transcendence and to boost our survivability. Because of that, you'll want to use Facet of Sacrifice, Facet of Ruin, Facet of Protection, and Facet of Purpose. For the gear to use, you only need the exotic class item with Spirit of Inmost Light and Spirit of Syntheseps, as these two perks will boost our damage even further. For armor stats of focus, I'd recommend focusing melee and super, as both of these stats will boost our ability regeneration and damage for these two stats. For armor mods, you'll want to use melee-centric mods like Hands-On, Heavy-Handed, Melee Fawn, and Time Dilation. Overall, this build has continued to be incredibly strong since it was discovered, and it's going to continue to dominate this subclass. Well, that'll wrap up today's video. If you found it helpful, a like rating would be greatly appreciated, and consider subscribing to the channel for more Destiny 2 content dropping soon. If you'd like more content from me, then consider following my other social media platforms or clicking the video on screen now. I'm SniperKH, and I'm out. Good luck with gaming.